privacy is no longer a social norm. We don't no longer care.
It is precisely when we think that we don't need privacy that we should guard it the most because we're not as aware of the dangers.
These companies weren't never created to handle this kind of information.
When governments realized what companies like Google were doing, the first reaction was like, no, we have to regulate this. This is insane. But then the second reaction was like, well, wait a minute, maybe we can actually connect to this and try to use it for national security purposes.
How are they using their new technologies for, their algorithms and their AI facial recognitions to control society in a literal way?
We are getting dangerously close to that kind of Chinese model. And instead of looking at the Chinese model and saying, okay, let's make sure we kind of run in the opposite direction. We're liberal democracies. This is not how we do things. We're trying to kind of imitate what they do and kind of compete against them. And of course, this is a competition and that will lead nowhere good. It's like a race to the moral bottom, and liberal democracy should do better.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special edition of Through Conversations podcast, where we explore the truth through conversations with the most brilliant minds. Today, I am joined by Professor Carissa Veliz, an associate professor in philosophy at the Institute for Ethics in AI and a fellow at Hertford College at the University of Oxford. She's also the author of a mind-blowing book, Privacy is Power, and the editor of the forthcoming Oxford Handbook of Digital Ethics. So, Carissa, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Alex. It's a pleasure.
I'm excited, and this interview is going to be mind-blowing for sure, because your book has already, shed a light into what's happening in the privacy or lack thereof that we think we have in society. But before we get deep into that, Carissa, my insurance company asked me to download an app that tracks my location every second. But they offer me a discount, so I'm excited about the discount. Should I take the deal, or should I not take the deal?
If I were you, I wouldn't take the deal. Because even though you might be saving a few dollars here and there with that, you will also be losing. So that data will be used against you, not only by your insurance company, but potentially by hundreds of other companies if your insurance company shares that data with them.
So when I download that application, they give this Trojan horse strategy, right? They offer this discount, but that means the premium for them, the incentive, or rather the profits of that data is much bigger than my discount, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you might feel very good about the discount, but you might up ending paying more for your insurance down the line, even though they might still show it as a discount, but you might have paid less for your insurance, and you might pay more for all kinds of things, like the flight ticket you're going to buy, or the price for a course. Many of the things that we buy online have personalized pricing, and the more they know about you, the more they can know exactly how much to charge you, how high you're willing to go.
How did we get to this point where the revenues of companies weren't more related into the actual service they offer? So insurance, they would make profits with insurance. Now it became, again, like a Trojan horse strategy where the real gold mine is our data. And why is data so valuable on the first hand? And on the other, how did we get to this point?
Data is very valuable, but it's very valuable in a kind of dangerous way, because it's valuable if you have millions of data set points. But because a lot of individuals say like, well, if my data is valuable, then I want to sell it, and make a quick buck that way. But actually, you would earn only like a couple of dollars or so, because what's really valuable is to have a lot of it and from a lot of people. And the way we got here is a story that has to do with Google. So Google was a startup in the year 2000, 2001, and it had this great product. It had a search engine that kind of ordered the chaos of the internet, and it was very, very useful. But it had no way of making money. So at the beginning, Google had this quite academic mindset to the project, and they wanted to offer information to people, but they couldn't come up with a sustainable business model. And there is a paper that the founders of Google wrote in 1998 in which they explicitly say how they don't want to have ads, because as soon as you have ads, then your loyalty is compromised, because really your clients are the publishers of ads and not the users. But it was 2001. They were desperate. Investors were getting very impatient. One of them said that he had invested kind of millions in Google, and the only thing he got in return was this kind of very expensive T-shirts. And so they couldn't come up with anything better than to rely on ads, and not just any kind of ads. They realized that they could have a competitive advantage because they had a lot of personal information that nobody else had about what people search for. And of course, what people search for is incredibly sensitive. It has to do with their health, with their mortgage, with their jobs, with their families. And they decided that they could use this information to personalize ads. And that kicked off a kind of arms race in which everybody realized that maybe they could collect personal data as well. And if they could, maybe they could sell it as well. And now every company basically has this dilemma of whether to do this. That is a kind of very easy way to earn money, but it's also incredibly dangerous, not only for individuals, but it also creates legal liabilities for companies. And of course, it has this kind of network effect of endangering democracy and society in many ways.
Yeah, we'll get into those for sure, how this infringement in privacy and these huge sums of data have really threatened democracy in a way. And also now with AI, we'll get into that as well. It's getting even more and more exacerbated. But Carissa, so Google now offers when I wake up at 3 a.m., like a hypochondriac, and I wake up and say, why is my head hurting right now at 3 a.m.? They have that data, right? They have that search, and then they sell it to other third parties. Or how does that work?
So it depends on the company. So often what happens, like with a company like Google, is that they will sell access to you. So instead of selling the data directly, they want to keep it because that's what gives them the competitive advantage. And they sell the option to kind of show an ad to this guy who's waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning worried about headaches, And so a company maybe like Advil will say like, oh yeah, like that's a very kind of valuable client. We will, and there's a bid going on. So companies bid for your attention, and they decide how much to pay for that ad depending on your personal data. So if you've like been desperate to kind of get rid of your headache for 3 months, then headache relieving drugs will be willing to pay more than a company of shoes to show you those ads. But in other cases, so there are other companies, very big companies, and sometimes people have never heard of them, but companies like Oracle, like Experian, that are called data brokers, and their job is to collect as much personal data about people as they possibly can. And they do buy this data. Sometimes they buy this data from social media, like, for instance, Twitter, or they buy this data from web browsers and from any possible company. And then they put it together, they put it in a folder, and they sell it in two ways. They can sell it individualized. So let's say a company wants to hire you and they want to know about you as much as possible. And so they will buy your file from a data broker. Or they sell it in lists. So you might belong to the list of, like, I don't know, males from this age group who are interested in headaches. And, some of these lists, just the title of the list tells you how sensitive this is and how kind of unacceptable and creepy it is. So it includes things like people who have been victims of rape, people who suffer from premature ejaculation, people who have lost a child, people who are HIV positive, people who have anxiety. So the most sensitive categories are the ones that are very often the most valuable, because if they know where you hurt, if you know what you're scared of, then they can really kind of exploit that kind of information.
Wow. And so I've always thought, I've interviewed also Seth Stephens-Davidowitz, who wrote a book relating, data analytics in Why Everybody Lies, in his book. But right now, what I'm sensing is these companies weren't never created to handle this kind of information. It was just like a eureka moment where they saw the potential of brokering this data. But us as individuals, we wouldn't go to a date and say, hey, at 3 a.m. I wake up and I search for headaches, right? But we trust these companies. And so, of course, the terms and conditions should mention that. I have a question relating that specifically, but how are they able to manage such a burden of responsibility? Or rather, how have we allowed them to continue doing this?
We didn't. I don't think we allowed them to do anything. I don't think we trust them. They just did it without asking us. And by the time we figured it out, decades had passed, and companies were like, hey, how did you think email worked? But like realistically, when, the first people opened their email accounts, it never crossed their minds that they might be giving up their personal data. That wasn't an obvious thing. And furthermore, if you read the terms of conditions, pretty much of any big online company, they are so vague. Basically, it says like they will collect your personal information for purposes such as making their product better and research. And they can change the terms and conditions at any moment. They can share that information with third parties, and they don't have to let you know. So it's so vague that it's not informative. It doesn't tell you which third parties, for what purposes. So even if you read the terms and conditions, which can change at any moment, it wouldn't tell you much. So I don't think there's any consent here. I don't think there's any voluntary consent. We got told after the fact that we had consented and that this was like the bargain that we accepted, but we never got asked. Not even governments got asked. And what happened was, after 9/11, the United States government realized that they could try to harness the power of all this data for the purposes of national security. I think this was a plausible and well-intentioned hypothesis that for good or bad doesn't pan out, because big data is very effective at identifying patterns for which we have billions of data points, like what people buy, because there are billions of people buying things every day. But for things like terrorism, that is always going to be a rare event. It's actually not that great. And so when governments realized what companies like Google were doing, the first reaction was like, no, we have to regulate this. This is insane. But then the second reaction was like, well, wait a minute. Maybe we can actually connect to this kind of data flow and get it and try to use it for national security purposes. And so essentially that blocked the effort to regulate these companies in the US. And literally, you saw the government plugging into the data flow. So in some cases, like AT&T, going into the building and like setting up their shop so that the data had to go through intelligence agencies like the NSA.
Wow, and so everything became a monster in itself, a new one that we never really thought that when I would communicate via emails, I would be consenting to giving all of my information that I perhaps don't even know about myself, because some of these features are also predictive, right, Carissa?
Yeah, a lot of it is based on inferences. And so when people say that they think they know what kind of data they're giving up, I think that's very questionable. So I've heard a lot of people say things like, well, I don't care if Facebook gets data about the kind of music I like, that's fine. But what they don't realize is that Facebook uses that data to infer things like their sexual orientation, which they might not be happy giving out to Facebook.
Wow. So the other one that comes into mind, and you've discussed this previously, is how this thin line into discussing national security purposes and quote-unquote putting in that big word, which is almost like if someone would argue against it, would be like, you are a traitor, you're against the United States. So the question here is, has it been effective? You mentioned that in terrorism it hasn't, but are we aware that this whole confluence of data that involves perhaps me and a million other people, one of them perhaps is plotting to do something, has proven effective, or has it really been just, dirty data?
So the evidence tends to suggest that it hasn't been effective. So all of the committees that have looked into it have concluded that it hasn't been effective. There is one report in the UK that suggests that it has been effective, but it doesn't really give many examples. One of the problems is that all of this is kind of top secret, and so it's very easy to kind of shield behind confidentiality, which is confidential for good reason. So it's a complicated area. But so to be clear, yeah, I think it's true that very often when people raise issues like terrorism, it kind of stops the conversation, because obviously nobody in their right mind would kind of be supportive of terrorism. But evidence suggests that targeted surveillance is very effective at fighting against terrorism. So it's fine to surveil the bad guys, when you have enough reason for suspicion. What it's not okay is to mass surveil the general population, because it's not necessary and it's not proportionate. So it's not necessary, but because it can be done in other ways that are less invasive, like targeted surveillance, and it's not proportionate for the same reason, because you can do it in less invasive ways.
Yeah, this reminds me of Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon, right? Where everyone's being surveilled from the center. The whole prison is being surveilled. And we created our own prison in ourselves because, you touched right now on one of the reasons why privacy eroded, which was 9/11, which was a huge shift in everything, especially in going to the TSA airports here in the United States, which is very difficult, but also privacy concerns. The other one is how, for example, Mark Zuckerberg, you write on Privacy is Power, he says that privacy is no longer a social norm. We don't no longer care. And I would like to ask you, is this true? And on the other hand, is it not true? Because all of us, especially younger generations, are obsessed with sharing everything. We don't care anymore. We just post everything that we think and we share it on social media. Everyone has to be involved in our lives 24/7. So is Mark Zuckerberg right, Carissa?
So Mark Zuckerberg famously said this in 2010, that we had kind of evolved and that privacy wasn't important as it used to be. And he had to backtrack himself. So in 2019, he claimed that the future is private, which of course is a great irony given the work that Facebook has done to erode privacy and to kind of try to convince us with that narrative that privacy is no longer important. And obviously, whenever the CEO of a tech company says something, we have to kind of put it into context. And of course, Mark Zuckerberg has a great interest in peddling that kind of narrative. While at the same time, he bought the 4 houses surrounding his in order to have privacy. So I would rather view it as a very effective way of marketing and nothing to do with the truth. And regarding young people, I'm not that sure. So I think it's a very bad thing for very young people to grow up in a highly surveilled environment because they do get used to it. And I think surveillance has the inevitable effect of creating conformity. So when people look at other people, people tend to conform more to social norms, to the orthodoxy, to kind of really extreme levels. So there's a famous experiment done by Ash in which a person is shown either long lines or short lines on a screen. And it's very obvious which are the long lines and which are the short lines. When the person is alone, they get it right about 99% of the time. But if there's a confederate in the room or more than one confederate who, when the long lines show up, they say, oh, it's a short line, then people start saying short line, even though it's obvious that it's a long line. And if that's the case for something as kind of insignificant as lines, all the more so with moral and political issues. So it's very, very kind of sensitive. But at the same time, I think there is something very natural and very innate about our need for privacy. So I've just published a new book. It's an academic book. It's called The Ethics of Privacy and Surveillance. And there I have a chapter about the animalistic origins of privacy, how if you don't give privacy to animals, they go crazy. And we share an evolutionary history, so we're not that different. And for instance, I think one of the kind of paradigmatic images of a teenager is this kind of their door shut and like don't come in kind of sign, Because teenagers are exploring the world, they're exploring boundaries, they're figuring out what they like, what they don't like, what they're good at. They're having questions about sex, about death, about drugs. And so I think teenagers naturally strive for privacy. And even though they do have this kind of pressure to expose themselves online, it's very curated, right? So they don't expose themselves in their worst possible moment. And many of them are coming up with interesting ways of obfuscation. So, for instance, sharing accounts with a friend so that it's not clear what data that people are collecting or companies are collecting. So I'm not sure it's as kind of black or white.
No, I didn't think about it that way and I appreciate it. And the reason why I think this is happening more is because, on one hand, this is getting into a tangent, which is social media, but young people, I think my first smartphone or smart tablet was when I was maybe 14 or 15. I don't know. So I've had more than a decade experience with technology. But younger people are, we call them the iPad babies, no? Or when they're in the restaurant and they're literally, their brains are being infused literally with using these technologies. And so for them, it is normal to see everyone posting on TikTok, on Instagram, everything they say, or just sharing any kind of information on WhatsApp rather than using Signal, the one that I know you suggest we should use. But here the thing is that maybe for us, not for me, but for younger generations, they really are okay with the trade-off because they're not aware of that trade-off. So how can we enlighten, this context not only into them, but also to other people who have this philosophy that privacy is no longer a norm?
So a lot of it is kind of telling them exactly what happens with their data because it's so obscure. It seems like, there isn't any consequence. So it's not like if your skin gets cut or if you get COVID and, you feel the effects, it doesn't feel like anything to have your data collected. So somebody has to tell you like exactly what happens and what can happen. And one of the characteristics of privacy that because it's not only cultural, because it has like political implications, we eventually learn. And there are two ways to learn. We learn through either like reflection and studying history, or we learn through bad experiences. And I hope that my book can contribute to the former and that we can think about it before having had a bad experience. But eventually, people get exposed. They get publicly humiliated. They get extorted. They get denied jobs. When there's a political issue, they want to protest and they realize it's too late because now they can't protest anonymously. And then they try to fight back. Very often it's too late and we have to go through like significant hardship and on harms that were preventable to kind of recover that amount of privacy and of freedom.
In your book, Privacy is Power, you discuss how many people, for example, you just mentioned denied jobs, but there's this whole new way of filtering who gets a job and who doesn't get a job, who gets a credit, who doesn't get a credit, and based on very weird lists, like you mentioned previously, or lists that not necessarily involve me, but may involve my neighbor. So would you care to expand on this idea, Carissa?
Yeah, so more and more algorithms are making very important decisions in our lives, and algorithms are notoriously opaque, so we're not sure how they work, and they rely on data, some of which they shouldn't even have, and very often when you get denied an opportunity, say a loan or a job or some other opportunity, you don't get a chance to kind of appeal the process or to ask like exactly why was I denied, and much less like to get an answer. So we're going through a process of civilization. We are living in the Wild West, and we need to order society just like we have in the past. So, at some point, food wasn't regulated, and you might eat something and die from being poisoned. And cars weren't regulated. And if you had a crash and had somebody died, then it was thought to be the fault of the driver who should have driven better. And we didn't regulate trains for a while. And eventually, we regulate every industry because safety and public health matters enough to create some minimum standards of security, of transparency. At the moment, we're allowing algorithms to make very important decisions with complete opaqueness, and people are getting hurt. So one example is the Michigan Unemployment Agency used an algorithm to try to detect fraud. They used it for about 2 years, and the algorithm falsely accused about 34,000 people. So it turned out that the algorithm was wrong 93% of the time. And these were people who didn't have a job, they were deprived of their checks. Some of them got accused of fraud and had to kind of defend themselves for hundreds of thousands of dollars in court. They lost their houses, they lost their families, and some of them ended up suiciding. So as we accumulate bad experiences and we learn from them, we will tame these technologies. But it's part of us as being citizens to be as well informed as possible and to demand that our rights be respected and prevent as many unnecessary harms as possible.
Wow. There are many things that come into mind, especially I think about the challenge of saying no to these companies. Because whenever you hit, like you said, the terms and conditions always change. They can change literally right now as we speak. Someone else, Riverside can just say someone else is going to come on the call and just record everything. Even the transcription of this conversation can be, sold to an AI transcription voice company. We don't even know. But the challenge here is that if we don't accept those terms and conditions, we can't use those services. Especially, for example, Google. Everyone uses Gmail to communicate, for example, or logging into Facebook or using WhatsApp. And so the challenge here is, as a consumer, they don't give you a choice to choose what to accept and what not to accept. It's literally a black and white. And so that's a challenge that comes into mind. Is there a way to prevent this? Is there a way to solve for this, Carissa?
So one thing that I think companies are starting to realize is that privacy is a competitive advantage, that people are sick and tired of being abused by companies. And so when an alternative rises, they stand a pretty good chance. And so sometimes you won't have a choice. Sometimes you have to use a service for your job or for something very, very necessary, and you won't have a choice. But when you do have a choice, it's very important to exercise it, because even if 5 to 10% of the population make that change, and it's not 100%, even if it's very imperfect, companies notice and they pay attention. So you don't have to use Gmail for communication. ProtonMail is just as good, and it doesn't collect your data. And you don't have to use Google Search. You can use DuckDuckGo. And you don't have to use Dropbox. You can use Proton Drive. And you don't have to use WhatsApp. You can use Signal.
So there are alternatives, even though they might not be the mainstream ones. There are companies that really are looking in a lookout for that. And, switching into perhaps a deeper realm of this, Carissa, is, you touched on how democracy could be at play with these, privacy infringements that we're seeing that we are not even aware of. And one example that you've shared previously is how the China social credit system can serve as a cautionary tale for us in the Western world. And how are they using their new technologies for, their algorithms and their AI facial recognitions to control society in a literal way? And what does that tell us in the way we are harnessing that power, that data here in the Western world?
Yeah, so China has been very explicit and very forceful in its use of data and algorithms to control society. So they have a system of social credit in which people get scored. So just like you get scored as a user, say on Uber, this is like a global score for who you are as a person. And it doesn't only relate to your job or to whether you're a good neighbor or whether you're a good parent. It relates to every aspect in your life. So say you get caught smoking in a train. You will not only be banned from getting on trains, you will also be banned from getting on planes. If you're on a dating site, your profile won't be very visible. You won't be able to stay at 5-star hotels. You won't be able to get a car without a deposit. So all your life will be affected. And this stands in contrast to liberal societies. So the principle of liberal societies is that your life has this kind of compartments and they shouldn't mix. So if you do something bad at work, you might face consequences at work, but unless you did something criminal, that's not going to affect your relationship to the state. It's not going to affect your relationship to your neighbors or to your spouse. China, in contrast, is a totalitarian society in which the totality of your life is under control by the state. However, one response from China could be like, look, we're just doing the same thing as the West. It's just like we're actually telling people, and you're not telling people. And there's some truth to that. So, for instance, if you live in the United States, you are being scored as a consumer. So next time you call a company, the company will be aware of that score. And depending on your score, they will treat you differently. Maybe you'll get an answer quicker, or maybe you will be allowed to return that piece of clothing or whatever. And however, it's still the case that your life has compartments and that consumer score will not affect, say, how you show up on a dating app or whether you get a loan, at least so far. But that said, we are getting dangerously close to that kind of Chinese model. And instead of looking at the Chinese model and saying, okay, let's make sure we kind of run in the opposite direction. We're liberal democracies. This is not how we do things. We're trying to kind of imitate what they do and kind of compete against them. And of course, this is a competition that will lead nowhere good. It's a race to the moral bottom, and liberal democracy should do better.
Is that race related with the emergence? Because since you published your book, Privacy is Power, we've seen the boom of AI. But is that related with AI?
That is related to AI. So one common argument in the West has been like, well, AI, the country who develops AI will have kind of global power. And in this race, of course, China and the US are competitors. And the Western companies like Facebook have explicitly said, if you regulate us, you will kind of tie our hands, and then we won't be able to compete with China, and then we will be at a disadvantage in military terms and otherwise, and that would be bad.
And so this race is literally to the moral bottom. That's a very brilliant way of saying it. And it's also interesting that, we'll get deeper into AI, but how you mentioned that Zuckerberg had to backtrack on saying that privacy is no longer a social norm. And then all of a sudden, I think a week ago, he boasted on how much data Meta has to train their AI models, which is mind-blowing because that data is us literally posting, right? And so is this a concerning feature, that where everyone, I don't think Zuckerberg created Facebook to finally get like an AI model, but they are using us to train their models, and they're boasting about it while saying that privacy is, a social norm again. So how do you think about all of this game that they're playing?
Yeah, I mean, it's getting really kind of ridiculous to follow whatever a CEO says. Like people like Zuckerberg, like Musk, they say, whatever is useful to them at the time, and then kind of pretend that they didn't say it and they're not held to account. And so I think, first of all, we should stop reporting on what they say, because in a way we're giving them a kind of prominence and a kind of power that they shouldn't have, and that clearly it's not warranted, because it doesn't matter what they say. What matters is what they do, basically. So I think we should pay much more attention to what they're doing and much less attention to what they're saying. But yeah, so everybody who has this data is now trying to harness it for the purposes of AI. And we're being told again that we consented, which of course is ridiculous, because when people open their Facebook accounts, like this whole generative AI didn't even exist. So how could we possibly consent to it? So we will see very interesting battles played out in the courts in the following years. Like at the moment, the most interesting one is the New York Times is suing OpenAI for using their data. And so we should pay attention to that. And there are about a dozen or more lawsuits in the pipes that are going to pretty much determine what AI and data looks like in the next decades.
But my concern here, Carissa, is that the genie is out of the bottle. Like all of the images that are coming out, especially deep fakes, voice, anyone can use a 30-second voice message of anyone and just, create a whole deep fake of their voice. Even if those court cases go in favor of us, of consumers, will that prevent what's happening across the world? And just, in a year we saw, I don't know if you saw the Sora new OpenAI video feature. You probably saw it. You're an expert in this field, so I'm sorry for that. But what I mean is that genie out of the bottle? Because now everyone has access to it. Everyone can create their own AI models. Everyone is selling their own models, their own large system databases. They're brokering this data. So should we prepare for an AI world where, we can't put this genie out in the bottle again?
So whenever we kind of, succumb to kind of narratives that are very, very, very comfortable for tech companies, we should be suspicious, because that's what what a tech company would love for you to believe, right? I mean, that's in their interest. So to put an analogy, like when we first developed nuclear power, should we have said, well, the genie's out of the bottle, so let's just kind of proliferate as much as possible? No, we try to keep it as low as possible, right? So one of the interesting things about this lawsuit between OpenAI and the New York Times is that the New York Times is demanding that OpenAI delete the algorithms that were trained with unlawful data. And we've seen this before in other lawsuits. So data can be deleted, and algorithms can be deleted, and they can be trained in a different way, and they can be designed in a different way. So there are two answers. One is like, no, the genie's not out of the bottle. Technology depends on our design. We can design it differently. Just like, when we first designed CFCs and realized, we were destroying the ozone layer, and we changed it, and the ozone layer is recovering. But the second answer is less consequentialist. And I think, I am tired of people focusing too much on the consequences and saying, well, if I'm not sure I'm going to succeed, then I'm just going to not care. That's too complacent. Sometimes we just have to do the right thing. Whether we win or lose, it doesn't matter. It's the right thing to do. And you don't do the wrong thing.
So the right thing here would be to just go back to starters. What would be the right thing here at this stage of technological development?
Well, to respect rights. So what are our rights? Our right to privacy is an important right for good reason. It's there in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights because the Nazis used it for genocide, and that could happen again. We have a right to copyright, and we have to assess whether copyright is being respected in this case. So I think, we have to go back to basics in the sense of what is democracy? What are people's rights? And how do we make sure that future generations have as many rights as we did, if not more? And it doesn't mean that we should destroy technology or something like that. That's silly and childish. No, we design it better, just like we've done with other tech.
You mentioned previously how we're still in this learning curve in terms of, regulating these technologies. And it seems as though, again, the advancements of an AI especially are going so fast that it's hard to keep track on what's happening. And so how do you see as an expert, how do you see the time frames of, us accommodating to what's happening in technology and all of this privacy erosion? Do you see within the next years of us, all of us waking up to the fact that this is getting out of hand? Because it's been since Google started, like you mentioned, this has been the norm. It hasn't changed. It actually, I believe it's gotten a bit worse.
In many ways, it's gotten worse. I think there's more data collected today than ever before. But in some ways, it's gotten better, right? So now we have a kind of social awareness that wasn't there before. Now we have certain rules like Europe's General Data Protection Regulation, which has changed the way companies collect data, but also how they organize it and what they tell us. So some progress has been made. It's not all bad. Mm-hmm. Regarding what will happen in the next few years, nobody knows. And if somebody says they know, they're either lying to themselves or to you or both. And if they have financial interest, then I would be very suspicious of whatever they are forecasting. So it depends on us. And it depends partly on historical matters, right? It depends on how things develop. So, global events like COVID change things. They change technology. They change how we perceive things. They change what we know. So I don't know what's going to happen. But I think democracy is so important that we should try our very best to protect it.
Do you think that one of those watershed moments, I mean, this is again into the prediction side of things, and sorry about that, but I'm curious because it seems as though the next presidential election here in the United States is going to be one of those watershed moments. And it's actually, you also discuss in your book, Privacy is Power, how, Cambridge Analytica created all of these data from Facebook to persuade voters into one side or the other, and even just harness information to target them. And so that was more or less the algorithm side of it all. Now it seems as though this election will be featured by AI. Do you see AI influencing more and more this presidential cycle? And would that be like a wake up moment where we said, no, you know what, we've crossed the line. Here we need to hire Carissa to be our advisor for AI in the White House?
So it could be. I don't think anyone knows, but it could be. So it could be that, days from before before voting, there is a deep fake, and even though people kind of suspect it's a deep fake, it might still have a big effect enough to sway the results of an election. We don't know. The fact that that's even conceivable is a pretty bad sign. We should put rules in place so that is clearly kind of impossible to happen. And so that should give us kind of reason to pause and reason to act as quickly as possible. It might be that we're lucky. It might be that, social media companies at the last minute put kind of rules in place. It might be that, we just get sheer lucky. Or it might be that we are more robust than it seems. I don't know. But we should definitely be thinking about these things and learning from experience and fast.
Yeah, one of the big themes in your book in the later chapters is how, these consumer appliances also have created this genie box that harness all of our data. One surprising theme, or rather one surprising idea that you shared with us, Carissa, in Privacy's Power, is how, a Samsung TV was connected to, I think it was like 500 other accounts, or
I think it was 700 in 15 minutes, something like that.
Exactly, even worse. So 500 was already worse, so 700 is awful. But all of these appliances, everyone has Alexa in their phone, in their house. Siri is probably listening to me right now, and it's probably gonna pop up as I said Siri. But the next feature of what's happening here is it started with the Touch ID, right? We gave Apple and we gave all of our tech companies the Touch ID. Right now it's Face ID, so they have our fingerprints and they have our faces. And now with Apple Vision Pro, they literally have goggles in our eyes, and they have a ton of information that I don't even know. I saw that Google can predict a lot of diseases with eyes. And so we are, on one hand, the reason why I ask this is because we have the power to choose to consume those things. But at the other hand, the cautionary tale is, they're going to listen and they're going to watch and they're going to literally harness that data. And on the other hand, we're crazy about these gadgets. We're crazy about having the next Apple Vision Pro. We're crazy about having these things. And so how should we navigate all of this turmoil in terms of, understanding the trade-offs between them having access to my retina for 5 hours straight, moving like crazy, and on the other hand, enjoying a movie on Netflix while I'm on the mountains?
Well, it's partly kind of maturing. I think we're in a very kind of nascent phase of the digital age, and we're still kind of very kind of dazzled by these sparkly gadgets. And it's only with time that we realize what we're really paying. And so, for instance, when I'm in a room full of people in tech who are actually building these algorithms, and I ask them, like, who here would choose an AI for a doctor? Like, nobody's hand goes up, right? And it's partly because they know better what's going on. And they are taking their kids to schools with no screens. So they have learned before we have, because they are designing the products. But I think, as experience goes on, so more and more I hear people say, like, one of their interests is being offline, which that didn't used to be the case at all. Like, that wasn't a thing. And yeah, it makes me kind of chuckle every time I hear it. And at the same time, like, there's such an opportunity here. There's such a business opportunity for anyone who wants to do good tech that is also private. Because we have very solid evidence about how when you give people the choice, when you actually give them the choice between two products that are equally good, just one of them gives them privacy and another one doesn't, people choose privacy. And they will. And so I am eager for the companies who are smart enough to see that. And there will be companies, and we will have better products, and people will choose them. So there's also that. There's also the thing about national security. So this lack of privacy is so dangerous for countries that either they will prevent something very bad from happening by placing rules, or something very bad will happen. And again, we will learn from experience. And just to give you a sense of how bad it is, I was reading about this app called Romantic AI. It's a service that allows you to create your own AI girlfriend. And Mozilla carried out a privacy analysis. And even though the app says that it won't sell people's data, researchers figured out that it sent out 24,354 ad trackers within 1 minute of use. That's how bad it is.
Wow. That's so...
Don't
I'm
date an AI.
Yeah, well, I'm getting an AI girlfriend. I'm like 1,000, 2,000 companies are also in our date with us. It's great.
Yeah, more like 24,000.
Oh, 24,000. No, even better, like a whole stadium. And they're just watching. Carissa, one of the concerns I also had is, this is creepy in itself. But on the other hand, is, we're also obsessed in learning about our heritage, about our roots. A lot of people are using 23andMe. You discussed it in Privacy is Power. And with what happened last year, on October 7th, in Israel, we saw user data targeting Ashkenazi Jews, and it was leaked online. That was the first moment. I've never done 23andMe. That was the first moment when it really confirmed that this information, it's not only threatening rather, that they sell it. But on the other hand, it can be leaked. It can get hacked, and people with bad intentions can use it. And so, can you share with us this part of the equation that we might not be really aware of?
Yeah, so that is in the nature of privacy, that when you think you don't need it, then you don't worry about it, you give out data, and then by the time you realize, oh, this is bad, now I need it, it's too late because the data is already out there. So that happened in Nazi Germany and Nazi Europe. Nazis getting a hold of data to find people. And that is the danger of having a structure of surveillance, that you never know who's going to use it and for what purposes. And that's why privacy is so important in principle, even when you think you don't need it, precisely because you think you don't need it. And that's when you actually need it the most, because it's when you're more vulnerable and more likely to share more data than you would if you realize that you will need it in the future. So just as an example, you might not be very sensitive about your health data because you're perfectly healthy, but you will not be healthy forever. That's part of the human condition. And it is also part of the human condition that people get discriminated against for health issues. So it is precisely when we think that we don't need privacy that we should guard it the most, because we're not as aware of the dangers. And if you think about how privacy evolved, imagine like being in the savannah somewhere. If somebody was looking at you, you were nervous because it meant you could be prey, right? And if a lion is looking at you, they're not interested in your haircut. They're interested in eating you. And that hasn't changed all that much. When somebody's watching you, you are vulnerable to them. And you notice that physically when you're in a dark alley. It's just like online, you don't see who's watching and it doesn't feel like anything. But it doesn't mean that it's not there, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't make you vulnerable. And you don't know how vulnerable and what data point is the one that might harm you.
Wow. And it's, I've heard this argument that it says if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. But at the same time, this argument doesn't plan out that much. And so, Carissa, I know we're short on time, and so I can speak with you. This topic really is important to discuss more and more. And so I hope to host you again. But in the meantime, after reading your book, Privacy is Power, what is the first step we can do to, at least get a better hold of our digital footprint?
So I have a whole chapter on that, on Privacy is Power, as you know. But basically make an effort without making your life too hard. It doesn't have to be hard. So use Signal instead of WhatsApp. It's just as good. It doesn't collect your data, and it works perfectly fine. Use DuckDuckGo instead of Google Search. Use Proton Mail. Use Proton Drive. There are alternatives out there. When you go outside of your home, try to turn off your Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Try to not buy gadgets that are unsafe if there are safe alternatives. If you want a really good conversation, don't record it. If you want a really good party, ask your friends not to upload anything. If you want a really frank debate in the classroom, turn off the cameras and the microphones. And, there's a space for tech and there's a space for the analog. And don't forget, like, the richness of the analog world and how there's no real substitute for it. If you stop going to your favorite coffee shop and spend your time online, by the time you go to your coffee shop, it won't be there anymore. And then it's very hard to retrieve. And the same thing with the natural world. There is no substitute for the natural world. And every virtual reality depends on the natural world. So we shouldn't neglect that aspect of the world. Not everything should be digitized. Not everything should be surveilled. We have to have areas of life that are free from that. And just to end, so it might seem radical to suggest that we shouldn't be trading in personal data, but really, when you think about it, what's radical is to have a business model that depends on the massive and systematic violation of the right to privacy. Mm-hmm. And technology can be designed differently. We've seen this in history, how we polish technology to be much safer and to support democracy rather than undermine it. And it doesn't take a big effort to make a big difference.
Wow, Carissa, this is the last episode of the podcast because I'm turning off the cameras and I'm turning off the microphones. I'm just joking. Hopefully it's not the last episode. Well, Carissa, thank you so much for joining me. I will share everything in the notes for everyone to reach out to you and to read your book, Privacy is Power. So thank you for joining me. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Alex. It's been a pleasure. Gracias.